Phobia is defined as an irrational fear of an object, situation, or a person. It is irrational because in most of the cases it stems out of inadequate knowledge or misinformation. In most of the cases, when you enlighten the subject about that particular object, person, or situation, the phobia just disappears. Homophobia would be defined as an irrational fear of homosexuality or homosexual persons. Similarly, transphobia would mean an irrational fear of transgender or transsexual persons. Ignorance is a very fatal disease. When we don't know about something and we are suddenly exposed to that stimulus, the immediate response to that object of ignorance is fear. Phobia is best explained by this theory. Homophobia has been largely inculcated into our mind by the social construct. When we grow up, if you do not see a model which is homosexual, when you grow up in a heterosexual model and you are taught that that is the only normal model that exists and anything outside that box does not exist, or if it exists, it's an anomaly, then you gradually become phobic. You fear that you are becoming abnormal, you are supporting abnormal, you are viewing abnormal, and it is your moral responsibility to stop the abnormal. Over the last few decades, there has been a raging controversy and debate on whether homosexuality is normal. And way back in 1970s, American Psychiatric Association declared that they no longer consider homosexuality to be a disorder. They removed it from their Manual of Diseases, DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. The same thing was reflected in a statement by World Health Organization, and homosexuality was removed from the classification of diseases of ICD-10, the International Classification for Diseases. In a recent controversial statement, a senior member of the Indian Psychiatric Society, Dr. Indira Sharma, stated in January 2014 that homosexuality is unnatural. And this is totally contrary to the statements of World Health Organization and American Psychiatric Society. So a controversy started. Activists and other doctors who were sensitive to the issue of homosexuality asked for an explanation from the Indian Psychiatric Society. The explanation came a month later, in February, when the IPS jointly declared that they do not consider homosexuality to be either a disease or a disorder. I think this is a success story. We often come across this question as to whether homosexuality is genetically transmitted, or whether there is a single or multiple genes coding for homosexuality. Well, I should tell honestly that there is no conclusive study that points towards a very specific genetic locus, and we have to further our studies in this. But there is another aspect to this question. We need to understand why is this question being asked. If it is purely for academic purpose, then the studies are welcome. But if we are trying to normalize homosexuality by proving that it is genetic, then I believe this approach is not a scientific approach. Not anything that is genetic is considered to be normal. For example, there are so many cancers which are genetically transmitted and they are not considered to be normal. On the other hand, there are so many non-genetic attributes of human life, like wearing clothes, like speaking in a particular language, that is not genetic but that is considered to be perfectly normal. Even heterosexuality has not been validated to be normal on genetic basis. So validating homosexuality, the normality of it based on genetics, is a wrong use of genetics, I should say. When we are discussing about homophobia, we should discuss or mention about something called internalized homophobia. It means when a person himself or herself is homosexual, he or she might fear homosexuality. This is kind of fear of one's own self that results from the hatred towards homosexuality that has been imbibed into your mind by the society. This is detrimental because a person who considers himself or herself to be abnormal cannot flourish in life, emotionally, physically, health-wise. There is one diagnosis that still exists in the ICD. It is called ego-dystonic sexual orientation. It is used particularly for homosexuality. The word ego-dystonic means that you are homosexual, but you are not comfortable with the fact that you are homosexual and you wish you could be other than homosexual, that is heterosexual. Now, this ego-dystonicity, as we understand, is largely imbibed by social customs, groomings, and the hatred that has been imbibed in you. So it is the ego-dystonicity that needs to be cured and not the sexual orientation. So if at all a person is diagnosed with ego-dystonic homosexuality, please remember to treat the ego-dystonicity, that is the discomfort, and not the homosexuality. And you know how to treat the discomfort. Enlighten the person and encourage the person. That is all it takes. There is a growing need for including issues of sexuality, particularly homosexuality and transgender issues, in medical curriculum. This is because at a time when it was considered to be abnormal, pages after pages have been wasted writing about them. And now just making a mention that it is no longer a disease is not going to cure the ulcer that it has caused in medical fraternity's mind. It needs to be very specifically emphasized over and over again that it is not a disease and we are not going to treat homosexuality. If a homosexual person is depressed, we will treat the depression and not the sexuality. Such very specific approach is needed. A time was there when a number of questions were set on homosexuality as a disease. And we know that setting question kind of encourages students to read that chapter over and over again, and it imprints in their mind. So it is important for the university question setters to set questions on the normality of homosexuality. Otherwise, the students will not be encouraged to read that chapter over and over again, and we will not get a generation of doctors who are totally updated on issues of sexuality. One thing is very clear, the way I see it, the biology syllabus of the lower grades and the medical curriculum of MBBS is basically biased about sexuality. In subjects like physiology, pathology, medicine or pediatrics, we do not get a specific chapter called the sexual system, but we get a chapter called reproductive system. That instantly gives you an impression that the discourse on sexuality is essentially based on heterosexual reproduction, and any discussion outside reproduction is not necessary. So it's not medically relevant. If the syllabus remains like this, then in spite of so many nagging about, urging about talks on homosexuality to be initiated, I don't think much is going to be changed. Because in the subconscious, you know, it is not something that affects the mass. That is what the medical curriculum teaches us. Homophobia, like any other phobia, can be treated. At least we can try to treat it. The basic management of any case of phobia is to enlighten the person with knowledge, because the cause of phobia in most cases is ignorance. So the first approach is to expose a homophobic individual or a transphobic individual to proper information about homosexuality and transsexuality. In most cases, this will help the person to eradicate phobia. If that doesn't help, we can expose the person to a gay, lesbian and transgender community and help the person observe the day-to-day activities of the person, so the person understands that there is nothing special, different, good or bad about a particular community. They are as good or as bad as anyone else. And even if all these measures are not helping, we have to understand then that there is a deep-rooted psychological or psychiatric comorbidity that is inhibiting the person to imbibe new knowledge. So then proper psychotherapy and psychiatric drug therapy might be needed.